meeting.
Right?
What we're going to cover is which accounts the department funds are held in, so where the money is, actual funds available to each department as of 31st, reserve goals for the operational funds, as well as capital restricted funds for the district reserve policy that the board has adopted. And then long-term liabilities, fund planning, and investments. Sorry, lights right one.
Which light is it?
It's that one. It's,
You could actually pull the string and turn that light off.
Yeah, don't pull it.
Will it do it?
It'll turn that whole light off.
you
Awesome.
guys all right with it?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. Does that work?
Yeah, it's better. As long as everybody else can see it.
We're good.
So district funds are maintained in several accounts.
Bless you.
The majority, or the daily operating funds, are in the operating account. As the name implies, the payroll account is only used to pay employees and employment liabilities, so money is transferred on a payroll basis to the payroll account from the operating account. Operating reserves, instance sustainability reserve, is a reserve that's set up to maintain excess reserves from surpluses in budgets, and also to build up a sustainability reserve, which is a part of the district reserve policy. The capital reserve is restricted funds from the connection fees, fire impact fees, and money the county or the fire department receives from out-of-county assignments. So that's restricted to capital purchases such as vehicles, buildings, equipment, infrastructure.
Kelly, can you tell me, does capital reserve include capital projects?
So the capital reserve would be capital money, so that'd be reserved for buildings, infrastructure,
but in the-
vehicles, that's the capital projects.
But in the reports, one of them, I don't know which one, it has them listed as capital reserve and capital project money.
There was an account previously listed as capital projects that's been consolidated.
So it's gonna disappear.
It's the same as capital reserve.
So project name will disappear.
Right.
Okay.
So the names in this presentation are what they'll be being called. So long-term maintenance fund is the fund from restricted and unrestricted funds held specifically for the long-term maintenance and replacements. So specifically, it's being started for the long-term maintenance of the treatment plant. That also would apply to long-term maintenance projects if the district knows that they're going to replace a tank, knows they're going to replace a fire truck, whatever. And then finally, investments, funds from restricted and unrestricted funds invested for individual departments based on medium and long-term needs. So obviously, you're not going to carry your short-term need in a long-term investment. The decision was made to consolidate investments to single departments, so you're not interrupting investments for multiple departments if you have to pull money out for a single department.
Okay, so Kelly, another question in regards to long-term maintenance. Is that like approved long-term projects that money might come from other than capital funds?
It's planned long-term projects, like as I mentioned, specifically for the treatment plant, because there is a potential for every 10 years having to pay roughly $1 million for new membranes. So it would be planned money that the district budgets for and transfers on a specific need basis. So the operating cash, what is operating cash? The operating cash is reserve revenue collected through property tax, user fees, and reimbursements. So pretty much any unrestricted funds, late fees, user fees, property tax, donations, what have you. It's used to fund the daily operation of the district, so as we mentioned before, that's money that pays salaries, pays vendors, anything that normally would occur on a daily basis. Use these funds as appropriated through the annual operating and maintenance budget. So later on tonight, we're going to talk about the maintenance budget, or operation and maintenance budget, that's where these things come from. The or claims detail that you guys looked at, that's where those budget numbers come from. That's where we get that money. Where is the money? Operating cash for all departments is managed in the operating account, as we discussed earlier. Each department's operating funds are tracked through Black Mountain in the operating account. So although we have one account, all the money is in that account is being tracked per department through Black Mountain. So payroll again is, the payroll account again is solely for payment of payroll and payroll related expenses and liabilities. Funds are transferred from the relative departments to the payroll account for specific pay periods. So every pay period, there's a transfer of the required amount to payroll from the operating account. Operating reserve are revenues that are held in reserve, as the name implies, for such use as time as the department has a shortfall in revenue, a large unforeseen expense, or for a planned operational need exceeding the annual revenue of the department. So surplus money from the fire department, let's say, would go into the operating reserve to meet its minimum requirements, or even if it's met its minimum requirements, would continue to be transferred there until the fire department needed it for future use. Same as all the other departments. Where's the money? The money, operating reserves for all departments is managed in the operating reserve account. So again, it's one account, and again, it's being managed through Black Mountain. So we know what each department has within that account. Capital reserve, again, these are restricted funds, restricted to capital improvements or purchases, such as vehicles, facilities, and equipment. These funds are only used by board resolution. So any capital funds have to be through board resolution and board action. The capital reserves for all departments are managed in the capital reserve account. Again, on the theme here, there's one account, and it's being managed through Black Mountain. Long-term maintenance. This is, as discussed a minute ago, this is the accumulation of funds that facilitate planned replacements, primarily of membranes and other equipment and facilities. The main driver for this is the long-term maintenance of the treatment plant, to ensure enough money is accumulated to fund that replacement, but it also would apply to other departments and other needs, such as building replacements, vehicle replacements, and the like. So basically on a 10-year need, we would replace the membranes. So we're going to be budgeting and transferring 1/10 of that proposed cost annually through the budget process. So in the budget, in the next presentation, there's there is $100,000 that's being allocated for that. And that was all identified through the rate study for that particular item. As other projected replacements and associated costs are identified, they will be budgeted transfers made to ensure adequate funding for long-term replacements and maintenance. Again, that would be for things that are not necessarily part of the normal operating budget here. Those things would be identified and brought to the board for future transfers. If the board is, if staff is looking towards replacement of something, then it would be brought to the board and it would be identified as a project, and then funds would be allocated for that. Investments, based on the district's investment policy, general manager may elect to invest funds from the capital reserve. Funds should only be invested after goals for other reserves are met. So goals for the operating reserve, the sustainability reserve, and capital reserve. So those should all be met before we invest future money. Funds will be invested from each department individually. This will enable each fund to add or remove funds from investments without disrupting other departments. So if the fire department has a problem, they can dig into their own investments and not disrupt a larger joint investment for 2 or 3 departments. So the district reserve policy was adopted March 2018. I'm sorry, March 28th, 2009.
19.
19, whatever. You know what I meant. Just can't read. By resolution 2019-14, this policy outlines reserve targets for the operating reserves, stabilization funds, debt service reserves, post-employment benefit reserves, and capital reserves and investments. So unrestricted funds carryover. As unrestricted funds carry over from year to year, they will be transferred as outlined below. Funds will stay within their department unless used to repay another department. So if there's a loan from one department to the next, then that would be paid off before building up funds or building up reserves. And
I thought the board decided there were going to be no more loans from one department to another.
although there's no plan to have a loan from one to the next, but it's just identified that that's how it would be handled. There's no real desire to have an interfund loan at this point. But if it happens, then it would be by a board resolution, and they would have it all laid out on how it's gonna be paid out. Operational funds or unrestricted funds that carry over from prior year will be transferred in the following order. First thing would be to operational reserve. Once it's met its reserve amount, then we put money into the stabilization reserve, which only applies to water and sewer. Make sure that debt service is met. Then into post-employment benefit liabilities. Finally, into capital reserves. And if capital reserves has met its requirements, then investments can be made. Again, the general manager has the ability to invest money outside of this through capital reserve if he chooses. That would basically be made if there was a long-term need, such as the long-term maintenance, and you know you're gonna have that money invested for 10 years, might as well put it in something that's gonna actually do something for you. So operating reserve goals, each department's goal for operating reserve is to maintain 50% or 6 months worth of their annual budget in reserve. So I don't know offhand what the budget is, but basically we want to have 50% of this year's fire budget, not out of the fire budget, but 50% of it in reserve. So if we're stalled and waiting on property tax, then we have something to carry us over until we get that money. Excess revenue funds, any excess revenue or funds that were budgeted but not spent for a specific department would be maintained within that department's reserve account. So we're not gonna just throw it in a pot and hope for the best. So the fire money will stay fire, lighting will stay lighting, so on and so forth.
What?
I know.
What?
At the discretion of the general manager, these excess funds will be either held in the operating account for that department or transferred to the operating reserve or restricted reserve for that department, assuming the operating reserve goals have been met. So you can either keep it in the operating account as a buffer there or put it into the operating reserve, and I'm sorry, that should say capital reserve, but depending on whether other goals are met for the other reserves. Stabilization funds, this is again identified in the
Reserve policy.
thank you.
Mhm.
Should have gone a couple hours ago. Yeah. So identified in the reserve policy is identified as 33% of the annual budget, and this applies to water and wastewater with the intent that some reserve, even small, would help offset rates if we have a spike for some reason or a 1 or 2 year decline in rate revenue.
That means each of those,
Plus you,
Pardon?
each one, water, separate from wastewater, will have 33%.
Correct. So excess revenue or funds that were budgeted but not spent for the water or wastewater department would be transferred to their stabilization funds respectively. That's assuming, again, assuming through the chain that their operating reserve was met before money was thrown into stabilization reserve.
Mm-mm. I just heard something that made me chuckle. Excess revenue.
So debt service reserve, currently the debt service that the district has is for the 650,000 gallon water tank that was built in 2009 and gets to pay for the next 30 years. That's a USDA loan. Currently its debt service, its reserve has been met. It's currently roughly $67,000. Eventually that amount will go up. The purpose of this account is basically to single that out. It already is essentially separated, but to further separate it so that that money is distinguished from anything else. The board can see what it is, the state can see who it is, or what it is, and everybody can know that we're covered in that aspect. Prior to June 30th of every year, for the close of the fiscal year, the general manager will make sure that the funding is met in that account for whatever loan we have with them. Post-employment benefit reserve. Through the annual budget process, the department will budget sufficient funds to pay any post-employment benefit liabilities, specifically for retired individuals from the district. Currently we only have one, but we will eventually have more, as you can imagine. So this would offset future payments and ensure enough money to cover our unfunded liabilities in the future. Based on the last Gatsby report, the district annual liability for post-employment benefits was $17,127. That was for fiscal year 17-18. And that will only go up. The district continues to pay all invoices they received for post-employment benefits